Have you ever questioned your faith or felt unsure about what you believe in? Maybe you have even been told that if you have doubts, you just don't have enough faith. You see, struggling with doubts can be really confusing and scary, and it can feel really overwhelming to open up to anybody else about it. But the encouraging thing is that if you have ever doubted your faith, you are not alone. And the Bible isn't silent about this topic. So what does it mean when we doubt? And what are we supposed to do with our doubts? We're talking about that and more right now.
A couple of months ago, my wife and I went out to dinner with some friends of ours that we've known for a few years. And you know how you're in those conversations where, the conversation's really going and then it kind of dies down a little bit and somebody thinks of something and that gets the conversation going again. Well, we'd gotten into that kind of quiet moment in the meal and our friend just blurted out, "So do you guys believe that man landed on the moon?" And that I didn't know that anybody didn't believe that man landed on the moon. So I came out with yes. And she goes, "Well, what about all of the evidence?" And I'm like, what are you talking about? Right. And she told us to check out this documentary or whatever. But then the conversation kept going. And then she shared with us the next question, which was, do you believe that the earth is round or flat? And I'm like, what's happening right now? Are we unpunked? Like what's happening? So I actually said, are you serious? And she goes, "Well, yeah. Yeah. Are you aware of the evidence for whatever?" And I don't know. It was the weirdest conversation I've probably ever had with a friend. And it was just odd, right? Like I didn't know that people doubted that at all. I mean, I knew that, I don't know, Drake or one of those guys, Kanye or somebody, was a flat earther, but those are the outliers. You know what I mean? But this is a normal friend of ours. So I didn't know what to do with this. Now I did watch the documentary that she recommended about the moon landing, and I'll be honest or transparent enough to share with you that I'm still 90% sure man landed on the moon. 90% sure. 92% sure man landed on the moon. But there's some things that I don't doubt at all, right? I don't doubt whether or not the moon is made of cheese. I don't doubt whether or not space is cold. I don't doubt, right? There's things like that I don't doubt. But then there's other stuff that I do doubt. Like I've doubted whether or not anybody loved me. Like I don't know if you've ever been in a really bad headspace where you wondered that. And one of the lessons, by the way, I think I should point out that I've learned in my life is that doubting doesn't change what's real. It changes what you feel about what's real or not real, but it doesn't actually change the facts. Now, when it comes to religion and we have doubts, this can be really unsettling for us. Because what does this mean about us if we're doubting whether or not we believe in God, or Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, or that God created the heavens and the earth, or Genesis 10 and the story of the flood, or Jonah and the whale, or Jesus healing a man born blind? What do we do with those kind of doubts? They're a little bit unnerving, because I think some of us have either been brought up with the idea or somehow come to the conclusion that a real Christian doesn't struggle with their faith. And that's not been my experience at all. So when we have doubts, we're confused about what this means and maybe even a little bit scared. So I'm more of the confused. My wife is more of the scared. So when I struggle with doubt, there's a moment where everything's just kind of unsettled, but I'm not scared, because I know that if I keep taking steps one after another towards truth, it leads back to God. My wife, on the other hand, will respond to the same scenario with fear, because what if those steps don't lead back to God? So we respond to those doubts in different ways, but the existence of God is already settled, regardless of what we believe about his existence or whether or not we're questioning it. So what do we do when we aren't sure about what we believe, or when we're questioning our faith? What does this say about us? I had a professor in grad school, and he said, if you have not changed your mind on one significant thing every year, then you're not growing. Now, I pushed back on this because, of course, the word significant is relative, but what does he mean? And his response was, are you saying that you know everything? And so obviously my answer is no, I don't. And he says, so how about this? Is everything you believe 100% true? Are you 100% confident that everything you believe about everything is 100% right? And I said, no, probably not. And he said, that's all I'm saying. I'm saying that if you want to grow and learn, it's healthy to consider the possibility that you might be wrong. And what he did was he gave me room, not just to doubt, but to see my doubt not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Not a threat that would take me farther away from God, but an opportunity to grow more in my relationship with God. Because I don't think doubting is bad. In my personal experience, my doubts have actually led to spiritual growth. I used to believe that if I held my breath long enough underwater, that I would sprout fish gills and be able to breathe underwater. And I'm glad I came to doubt that and grew through it before I ever put that to the test. I'm wondering if you can look back on your life at anything that you believed was 100% true that you now think is silly that you ever believed. And at some point, what moved you into a place of trust, or at least where you're at now, was that you began to doubt what you believed at the time. And that doubt actually pushed you in a different direction. There's a myth around all of this, that if you doubt your faith, then you don't actually have faith. And I don't think that's true. I don't think doubt is the opposite of faith. I think unbelief is the opposite of faith. See, I think there's belief and then there's unbelief. And doubt is just moving towards the center to confirm your confidence in your position. That's all doubt is. Doubt isn't saying that I no longer believe in God. Now, doubt isn't saying that I no longer believe in the resurrection of Jesus or that Jesus healed people. All you're saying is I'm asking myself questions right now to confirm that I do believe or that I don't believe in something. In my life, doubt has been the motivator that eventually leads me to stronger faith. Or in some cases, like with the flat earth thing, doubt is the thing that leads me to a position of stronger disbelief. But it's a motivator. When it comes to faith, I doubted whether or not I believed in the creation narrative. That doubt motivated me to read more books on the subject than I ever had, and more art periodicals. I did a deep dive. And I came out on the other side of that a more confirmed, and I would say a more educated creationist. We even talk about this at Grace Church every other summer. We talked about it last summer, and we're going to talk about it next summer, but not this summer. But is there enough evidence outside of the Bible to confirm the biblical account of creation. And it's pretty cool. I would also say that it was my doubt in whether or not I could trust the Bible was 100% true that became the motivator for me to actually get to the place where I'm more convinced of the truthfulness of the scriptures than I ever was at any other point in my life. So doubt isn't the enemy of truth. I would say that doubt is a motivator to actually run harder toward it, is what it's been in my life. And if you've ever doubted your faith, I think you're in better company than what you know. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 2, it says, John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things that Messiah was doing. So he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you the Messiah we've been looking for, we've been expecting, or should we keep looking for someone else? That's crazy, right? Like John the Baptist. John the Baptist sent messengers to Jesus when he was in prison to ask, are you really the Messiah or not? Jesus told them, verse 4, go back to John and tell him what you've heard and seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor. And tell him God blesses those who do not turn away because of me. John the Baptist was a cousin of Jesus. There's a story about Jesus when he was 12 years old when his family goes with their family caravan from Nazareth, the Galilee area, all the way down to the southern part of the country where Jerusalem was for one of the festivals. And at the end of the festival, Mary and Joseph leave with the rest of the family in the caravan to head back north up to Galilee. And it was more than a day later before they found out that Jesus wasn't in the company. It was such a big group of people that were traveling together because there's safety in numbers from bandits and robbers and that kind of stuff, that when they finally, discovered that he wasn't there, in a panic, they ran back to Jerusalem and found Jesus teaching in the temple. It's a very famous story in religious circles. It's probable that John the Baptist, being only 6 months older than Jesus, was the person that Mary and Joseph may have just assumed that he was hanging out with. I mean, he'd been around Jesus his entire life. When Mary found out that she was pregnant, she went to go live with Elizabeth, her cousin, who was the mother of John the Baptist, who was 6 months pregnant with John the Baptist when Mary found out that she was pregnant with Jesus. And they stayed together for a while. So they were very close. They were a very close family. So John the Baptist grew up with Jesus. He knew all of this. John the Baptist is the one who, when he saw Jesus, when he was baptizing at the Jordan River, he said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. On another day, he's the man that actually baptizes Jesus. And when Jesus comes up out of the water, John the Baptist hears the Father say, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. And he sees the angel descending from heaven like a dove on Jesus. Like he saw all of that. Like if you've ever thought to yourself, I wish God would just show me for sure one time and I'd never doubt again. I don't know that that's true. Because when you read the biblical accounts of people who had actual encounters with God, many of them still struggled with doubt and faith afterward, which is crazy. Jesus tells the story. It's called the story of Lazarus, right? The rich man Lazarus. And the rich man is in hell and he yells across to Abraham with Lazarus there, send Lazarus back from the dead to warn my brothers so that they don't come here and suffer in this torment. And Abraham said, even if I sent Lazarus back, they wouldn't believe, right? And that sounds crazy because we think that if we saw something miraculous like that we would automatically believe. But I'm wondering if we haven't already seen miraculous things. And as time goes by, we're more likely to assign those to coincidences or just some other weird circumstance. Because then we start doubting again, which is where John the Baptist was, which is nuts to me. But he's in prison. So nothing's working out the way that he thought it was going to work out. It's very possible that John the Baptist thought that when the Messiah showed up, he was going to overthrow the Roman oppressors also. And when he hears everything that Messiah is doing and nothing has anything to do with raising up an army, and he's in prison condemned to die, yeah, he's starting to wonder, what the heck is happening? Did I pick the wrong guy? I like what John Bloom, who is an author with desiringgod.org, I like what he wrote about this. Here's what he said. He said, stuck in the putrid cell, he was assaulted by horrible accusing thoughts. What if he was wrong in following Jesus? There'd been many other false prophets in Israel. What made him so sure that Jesus wasn't a false prophet also? What if he, John, had accidentally led thousands of people astray? See, the thought of being executed for the sake of righteousness and justice, John could bear. But he could not bear the thought that he might have been wrong about Jesus. His one task was to prepare the way of the Lord. And if he had gotten that wrong, then his ministry and his entire life would be in vain. So he questions. He doubts. There's an author named Wade Bearden, and he says that when it comes to our doubt, as it relates to faith, there's usually three different types of doubt. The first is intellectual doubt. That was with me wondering fact versus fiction. Can the Bible be relied on? Is it a historically accurate document? Can it be trusted? Did God say, let there be light, and there was light? That's the intellectual doubt. Then he says that there's emotional doubt. And I think this is what John was struggling with, the emotional doubt. The emotional doubt is usually associated with pain. This isn't working for me, is what you would say, right? I believe in God and everything, but I asked for my grandmother to be healed of cancer and she died anyway. You and I both know people who've had bad things happen to them, and that was proof to them, apparently, that there must not be a God, because if there was a God, why do I suffer? Why is there pain in the world? That's emotional doubt. And the last is moral doubt. Moral doubt, I think you see a lot in our culture right now. Moral doubt has to do with the things that God says that are really inconvenient for us, or the commands that he's given us that we don't want to follow. And then so we ask ourselves, is that what he really meant? Right now, with everything to do with morality and identity, the Bible's really clear on these things. And I have pastor friends of mine who've asked, is that what it means though? Right? So then when Christianity becomes inconvenient, it becomes very difficult to hang on to acceptance from others, sometimes, and approval from God. And then we want to reconcile these two things when sometimes they're at odds. What I love is that Jesus responds to John the Baptist's doubt in two ways. The first way is that he simply answers him without criticism. He doesn't, if anybody in the world would know who Jesus is, it would be John the Baptist. So if I'm in Jesus' shoes and the person that I feel like I should be able to count on more than anybody else is asking me now, toward the end of my ministry, are you really the Messiah or not? I would go, what am I doing wrong here? That you're not, that even you don't believe in me, but that isn't Jesus' response at all. He simply answers the question. And in answering the question, Jesus tells his disciples, go back and tell John everything that you've heard and seen. Now, John had heard already from his jail cell what Jesus was doing. It just wasn't what he was expecting, or maybe what he wanted. But it's not that he didn't know what Jesus had been doing, right? So Jesus tells the disciples, go back and tell John that the deaf hear, the lame walk, the blind see again, and the dead rise. Go tell him, remind him of all of this. What Jesus wanted was for him to remember the ways that he had already experienced the presence of God, so that even now when he's in prison and doesn't feel like God is anywhere there, he can be reminded that it's not because God isn't, right? That goes back to that thing about doubts not determining reality. So he says, I want you to remember the ways that you've experienced God in the past, because that is going to be the thing to carry you when you don't feel him in your present. I've got a friend of mine, his name is Josh, Howerton. I like what he says to say about doubt. He says, if you can be argued into your faith, then you can be argued out of it. But no one can argue against what you've heard and seen God do in your life. What you and I need, if you haven't already had one, is a real encounter with a genuine living God. That's what we need. I need an encounter with the living God. And if you need an encounter with the living God, I don't think there's anything wrong with you just asking. There's a season of my life, and I brought this up before, where I was struggling in that the church, we couldn't get it off the ground. It had been 4 years. We're still not 100 people. And I got my son a new baseball glove, and it was brand new. I bought the leather softener, and I, massaged it. And now I needed to wrap it around the baseball and put those 2 thick rubber bands around it and leave it overnight so that it would curl naturally around the baseball. And our mailman leaves rubber bands everywhere. So I told my wife I'm going to go for a walk because I needed to find a couple of rubber bands. And so I have this pattern in my neighborhood. It's about 1.5 miles. And I kind of touch different tips of different neighborhoods. And originally that was my prayer walk. But tonight it's not my prayer walk. I'm just looking for rubber bands. But at some point on this, the church isn't going good. And the more it's not going good, the more time and effort I'm pouring into it. And I'm starting to neglect my wife and my kids. And just nothing seems to be going right in my life. And then I think I started praying, and then it ended up being a gripe session with God. And then I'm like, and I don't even know I believe in you or not, right? And which is always funny to me because here I am talking to the one that I say I don't believe in. Have you ever done that? Like told God that you don't believe in him, and then you caught how ironic it was that you're telling him that you're speaking to the person that you say you don't believe in. I made it all the way back to my house and no rubber bands. And now I'm not even caring about the rubber bands as much. Now I'm just griping to God, and I'm not done. So I keep walking and I say, God, I don't even think you care about me anymore. If you cared about me, you'd let me find one of the, at least like a rubber band, right? Like there's rubber bands everywhere. Like why would I actually need a rubber band? Won't you give me? And now I feel like Jonah, right? I'm complaining about that big plant that withered up that he was sitting under for shade that God had given. Like I'm just griping about nothing. And I go, God, if you loved me, you would have let me found a rubber band. Now I'm on round 2 of walking the same path I had already walked and had looking for rubber bands, not find any. But it was right after I said, God, if you really loved me, you'd let me find a rubber band. And within 3 steps, I look down and there's a rubber band. And I stop for a second. I bend down and pick up the rubber band. And I'm thinking, does this mean that there is a God, that he's listening to me right now? Is he trying to talk to me? So then I remember going, okay, God, but I said I needed 2. That's what I said. And the very next house had my second rubber band. I finished the walk and there were no other rubber bands. I don't even care what you believe about that story. Like I genuinely don't. I don't care what you think about it. What I needed was a hook to hang my hat on. And I have a real tangible moment in my life where I'm 100% convinced. I'm sorry. That I'm 100% convinced that God was putting his hand on me. And when I watch the same YouTube videos deconstructing faith or read my friends' Twitter posts about why they don't believe in orthodox biblical truth anymore, and you start to tumble down the rabbit hole or whatever, like Jesus said to John, I want you to remember what you know. And that's been good for me. And if you don't have any rubber band stories, honestly, I think one of the takeaways from today's teaching that you just ask God for one. God, nobody else has to understand. I just need to know that it's you. Like I genuinely think that you should ask for that. So pray for it. Ask for it. Second, he affirms John and mentions that there's a spiritual battle for truth. And I don't think any of us are surprised by that. None of the confusion that we see today around identity and morality is anything new. Like, it's not new. If you read the Christian New Testament and the letters that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church, you find out that the Christians in these churches came out of spiritually dysfunctional backgrounds who needed truth in order to become whole and healthy again. And it was messy and it was complicated. Jesus seems to indicate that there is a battle over what is true and what isn't in the world. And in John chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus refers to Satan as the father of all lies. And in this passage about John the Baptist, where John sends to, are you the Messiah or not? Toward the end of his interaction with the people that the messengers from John, he says this in verse 11. He says, I tell you the truth, of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. I love that. No one is greater than John the Baptist of all the people who've ever lived. Everybody who's born to a human father, none of them are greater than John the Baptist, he says. And John the Baptist doubted. And it didn't change Jesus' opinion of him. And I find encouragement in that when you go through seasons of doubt in your faith, that God doesn't change his mind about putting you on his team. God doesn't change his mind on whether or not you're worthy of love. God doesn't change his mind or not on whether he regrets blessing you with all of the blessings that he's already blessed you. John doubted, and he said, nobody's ever been greater than him. And then he says, yet even the least person in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. So he says, truthfully, the most humble people have a shot. Verse 12, he says, and from the time John the Baptist began preaching until now, the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing, but wicked people are attacking it. The gospel, the good and bad news. The bad news that mankind is corrupt. It is in desperate need of repentance and submission to the will of God, but the good news that God reconciles us to himself through grace has never been a popular message. Never. It seems like all other religions get a free pass. But when it comes to Christianity, it seems to be the only one that's ganged up on. I think part of the problem is maybe the way that Christians have responded in the world, but I don't think that's all there is to it, because I know that people of other religions have done some really horrible things as well. But if there really is only one way to God, and there really is a spiritual enemy who's trying to make a shipwreck of humanity's souls, it would make sense that the only one he would actually go after is the only one that's legitimate. That's not evidence for anything. I'm just saying that the aggressiveness I see against biblical truth is not surprising to me, is all I mean to say. So the fact that there'd be people that would attack it doesn't surprise me. Even in the Garden of Eden, the question that sent mankind off track into darkness and sin was, did God really say? It's in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. So before sin came into the world, Eve and Satan are talking, and he goes, but is that really what God said? And so the question now isn't as much if God said this or that. It's, did God mean what he actually said when he said that? It's that deconstruction thing with the idea that God's holding it out on us, or maybe we've always gotten it wrong. It's the motivation behind it, and it's the attacks against it. And whether you're religious or not, when people challenge us on the things that we believe to be true, the more tightly we hold on to those truths, the more likely we are to respond to their attacks on what we believe in an unhealthy manner. And if we're not careful, we can start to treat the people that are asking these questions as the enemies. And they're not. They should be the object, the pursuit of our faith. They're not the enemies of our faith. And Scripture talks about this In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, this is the Apostle Paul writing. He says in verse 3, he says, "We are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and we teach them to obey Christ." People are never the enemy. In fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that those people that you think are your enemy, I want you to go out of your way to love them and to bless them that persecute you and pray for them that despitefully use you. Jesus said, the people that you're most likely to think of your enemy, I want you to go most out of your way to treat with compassion and love and grace and mercy, because people are not who we attack. It's false arguments that need to be addressed. It's pride in the human heart that keeps us disconnected from God. And it's these lies from Satan, the father of lies, that threaten to pull me away from God and keep me from becoming the person God created me to be. So my encouragement for you is not to let your doubts just sit there and fester. Doubt is not proof that you don't have faith. In my experience, doubt is the thing that has led me to stronger, deeper, and more meaningful faith. But doubt unresolved over time erodes your confidence in what is right. It can weaken your faith if you do not seek truth. So don't sit on it. I'm going to ask you to do two things with your doubt. Number one, I want you to take your doubts about your faith to God. I want you to do what John the Baptist did. I want you to do what I did when I took that prayer walk. I want you to go somewhere where you can talk, and if this helps you, talk out loud. My wife doesn't like to do that as much. My wife likes to write out her prayers in a journal. I don't care however you do it, but I think you ought to do what John the Baptist did. I think you ought to go straight to God. Are you the Messiah or not? Like, do you love me or not? Do you exist or not? Like, go straight to God with your doubts. Like, bring him in on this. Like, he already knows that if you struggle, he already knows that you struggle, and he's not surprised by this. He's not rejecting you for this. He hasn't changed his mind on you for this, and he hasn't stopped loving you for this. I think that if you ask him, he'll do the same thing for you that he did for me, that he did with John the Baptist. I think he'll answer your question. That's what I think. I don't know. He didn't have to because I said that, but how do you know? You haven't tried. So go straight to God and say, God, I just need you sometime this year. Like, I don't even care if it's a rubber band, like, stupid thing. Nobody else can agree that that's a sign from you. I don't care. I just need to know. Like, I need to know that that's from you. That's what I'm asking for. That's the first thing I'm asking you to do. Take your doubt to God. The second thing I want you to do is to do the same thing that John the Baptist did. He shared his doubts with other disciples. I think you need to do that. I think you need to be open about what you struggle with other people who are following the way of Jesus. Oh, like, you can share your struggles with people that don't share your faith, and I already know where you're going to end up. I can tell you now. I'm just saying, if you want to find God, then share your doubts with those who have found him. That makes sense, right? Like, if you're stuck in a maze, you don't want to get answers from the people who are also stuck in the maze. I want to get answers from people that found their way into the middle. Like, doesn't that make sense? That those are the people that you should share your doubts with. So do that. Share your doubts with them. God is not intimidated by your doubts. Neither does he see this as a flaw to your faith. Otherwise, the Bible would not have included the story of John, of Mary, of Jesus' brothers, and some of the other disciples. Even after the resurrection of Jesus, it says at the end, at the beginning of Acts chapter 1, it said that this is after the resurrection of Jesus, that Jesus gathered his disciples together when he went to the mountain where he was transfigured in front of them and ascended into heaven. It said, and some of them still doubted. Like, it includes that. It doesn't hide it. Like, This is not unusual. And this can actually end up being a good thing. I like what Christopher Ellison and Neil Krauss wrote in their periodical called The Doubting Process, a longitudinal study of the consequences of religious doubt. Here's what they said. People who receive more spiritual support from members of their church will be more likely to seek spiritual growth when doubts about their religion arise. It's people who share their struggle with other people of faith, who end up finding that their doubt leads them to a place where their faith is reinforced, not torn down. So if you have doubts about faith, you are right now in the right place. Jesus said, keep knocking, keep seeking, and you will find. Next week, we're going to be looking at the influences that determine which direction your your doubt is going to take you. But for now, I'm going to ask you to pray with me. God, I love you with all of my heart. And I'm thankful that you care what we think. And you know what we think. You know what we struggle with. You're not intimidated by these things. And you invite us to bring these things to you. So I pray that we would. And then help us to be willing to share this with somebody else that's already found you. Help us to not struggle in isolation. And help us not to ignore our doubt, but allow our doubt to be the thing that pushes us to seek truth and ultimately find our way back to you again. This is my prayer. We ask this in Jesus' name, and we all say together, amen.
Hey, I'm glad that you checked out this video, and I hope that it was helpful for you. Here at Grace Church, we want to help you discover more about God and discover the purpose that He has for you. So if there's anything that we can do to help, please just let me know. You can connect with me by texting or emailing the info that you see on your screen. Whether you like prayer, would like to start an open conversation about your doubts, or you want to hear more teachings just like this one, I'm here to help. Just reach out and we can get a conversation started. That's it for this week. See you guys next time.